Darkness Unveiled, The Devil Beside You, the Ted Bundy story. He had blue eyes, a warm smile, and the kind of charm that made strangers trust him in seconds. He studied law. He volunteered at a suicide crisis hotline. He was described by nearly everyone who knew him as kind, intelligent, and destined for greatness. But behind that carefully constructed mask of normalcy lurked one of the most prolific and sadistic serial killers in American history, a man who confessed to murdering at least 30 young women across 7 states and whose true body count may never be known. His name was Theodore Robert Bundy, and by the time the world finally understood what he truly was, dozens of families had already been shattered beyond repair. The 1970s in America were a time of cultural upheaval. The Vietnam War was winding down, Watergate had shaken the nation's faith in its leaders, and a new wave of social freedom was sweeping through college campuses from coast to coast. Young women were embracing independence, hitchhiking, walking alone, living life on their own terms. It was a time when the concept of a serial killer hadn't yet entered the public vocabulary. The FBI's behavioral science unit was still in its infancy. There was no national database linking crimes across state lines. And in this atmosphere of naive trust and institutional blindness, a predator moved freely. Ted Bundy operated across Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, and Florida between 1974 and 1978, and possibly earlier. He targeted young women, most of them college students, most with dark hair parted down the middle. He lured them with intelligence, with feigned injury, with a disarming smile. And then, he destroyed them. This is not just the story of a killer. This is the story of how an entire nation failed to see the monster hiding in plain sight, and how that failure cost an untold number of young women their lives. Theodore Robert Bundy was born on November 24, 1946, at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers in Burlington, Vermont, and from the very first breath he took, his life was built on a lie. His mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, was just 22 years old and unmarried, a source of profound shame in 1940s America. To protect the family's reputation, Ted's grandparents, Samuel and Eleanor Cowell, raised him as their own son. For years, young Ted grew up believing his mother was his sister. Think about that for a moment. The most fundamental relationship in a child's life, the bond between mother and child, was a fabrication, a convenient fiction designed to satisfy society's expectations. What does that kind of foundational deception do to a developing mind? The household itself was far from stable. Samuel Cowell, Ted's grandfather and the man he believed to be his father, was by multiple accounts a violent, domineering, and bigoted man. Family members later described him as a bully who terrorized his wife, kicked the family dog, and swung cats by their tails. He raged at the world around him. Some accounts, though disputed, suggest even darker behavior behind closed doors. Young Ted grew up watching this man, absorbing the rhythms of power and control, learning perhaps his first lessons in how dominance could be exercised over the vulnerable. In 1950, Louise moved with Ted to Tacoma, Washington, where she soon married Johnny Culpepper Bundy, a hospital cook. Ted took his stepfather's last name, but he never accepted the man. Johnny was working class, quiet, and unassuming. Everything that Ted, even as a child, seemed to despise. Ted later described his stepfather with barely concealed contempt. He wanted more. He felt he deserved more. There was, from an early age, a gaping void between who Ted Bundy was and who Ted Bundy believed himself to be. And here's what makes his story so unsettling. By all outward appearances, Ted was a bright, engaging, and promising young man. He was a Boy Scout. He earned good grades. He was well liked by teachers. He attended the University of Puget Sound and later transferred to the University of Washington, where he studied psychology. He was active in local politics, volunteering for the Republican Party in Washington state. He worked at a crisis hotline center alongside future true crime author Ann Rule, who would later write the definitive account of his crimes in her landmark book, The Stranger Beside Me. Rule described him as empathetic, warm, and genuinely caring. He literally talked suicidal people off the ledge while, as we would later learn, he was simultaneously fantasizing about, and possibly already committing, unspeakable acts. In 1967, Ted began a relationship with a young woman named Stephanie Brooks, sophisticated, beautiful, from a wealthy California family. She represented everything Ted aspired to, but she eventually broke off the relationship, deeming him immature and lacking in ambition. Ted was devastated. Some criminal psychologists have pointed to this rejection as a pivotal moment, a narcissistic wound that never healed. Many of Bundy's later victims bore a striking resemblance to Stephanie Brooks, young, attractive, with long, dark hair parted in the middle. Was she the template? Was every subsequent murder an act of displaced rage against the woman who rejected him? Or was the darkness already there, waiting for an excuse to surface? Because here's what people often forget about Ted Bundy. He wasn't created by a single event. He was a slow-burning fire. Childhood cruelty to animals, early exposure to violent pornography, a fractured sense of identity. These were the kindling, and by the time he entered his late 20s, the fire was ready to consume everything in its path. The first confirmed disappearances linked to Ted Bundy began in early 1974 in the Pacific Northwest, though investigators have long suspected his crimes may have started years earlier. Some have pointed to the 1961 disappearance of 8-year-old Anne Marie Burr from her Tacoma home, just blocks from where the 14-year-old Bundy lived, as a possible first victim. Bundy denied it to the end, but he denied everything until he didn't. On January 4, 1974, 18-year-old Joni Lenz, a student at the University of Washington, was attacked in her basement apartment as she slept. Someone had broken in during the night, bludgeoned her with a metal rod from her bed frame, and sexually assaulted her with it. She survived, but with devastating brain injuries. It was a brutal, almost experimental act of violence, as if someone was testing what he could do, testing what it felt like. Then, on February 1, 1974, Linda Ann Healy vanished. She was a 21-year-old psychology student at the University of Washington, an avid skier, a weather reporter for a local radio station. Her roommates found her bed neatly made, but the sheets were missing. Her nightgown hung in the closet, stained with blood. A back door was unlocked. She was simply gone, as if erased from existence. Over the next several months, young women began disappearing at an alarming rate across Washington and Oregon. Donna Gail Manson, 19, vanished while walking to a jazz concert at Evergreen State College on March 12th. Susan Elaine Rancourt, 18, disappeared from the campus of Central Washington State College on April 17th. Roberta Kathleen Parks, 22, was last seen leaving Oregon State University's Student Union Building on May 6th. Brenda Carol Ball, 22, vanished after leaving the Flame Tavern in Burien, Washington, on June 1st. Georgian Hawkins, 18, disappeared from the alley behind her sorority house at the University of Washington on June 11th, a distance of less than 40 feet from one door to another. The pattern was unmistakable. Young women, college campuses, dark hair. No trace, no witnesses, no bodies. It was as if they were being swallowed by the earth itself. But on July 14, 1974, the predator made his first significant mistake. At Lake Sammamish State Park, a popular recreation spot east of Seattle, several women reported being approached by a handsome young man with his arm in a sling. He introduced himself as Ted. He was polite, charming, and asked for help loading a sailboat onto his car. Some women agreed to walk with him to the parking lot, but turned back when they saw no sailboat. 2 women did not come back. Janice Ann Ott, 23, and Denise Marie Nasland, 18, both vanished that afternoon from the same park on the same day within hours of each other. Now the police had something. They had a name, Ted. They had a description, handsome, articulate, with a Volkswagen Beetle. And they had a method, the feigned injury, the appeal to sympathy. Witnesses came forward. Composite sketches were drawn. The face that stared back from those sketches was eerily ordinary. He could have been anyone's neighbor, anyone's classmate, anyone's boyfriend. The name Ted and the composite sketch were plastered across Pacific Northwest media. And here is one of the most chilling details of the entire case. Multiple people who knew Ted Bundy personally, including his girlfriend Elizabeth Klupfer, his co-worker Ann Rule, and a university professor, independently contacted police to suggest him as a possible suspect. His name was submitted to investigators more than once, and each time it was deprioritized. Why? Because Ted Bundy was a law student. He was clean-cut. He was well-spoken. He didn't look like a killer. He didn't fit the profile. The system designed to protect society from predators couldn't recognize the predator standing right in front of it. By the fall of 1974, the disappearances in Washington slowed, then stopped entirely. But Ted Bundy hadn't stopped killing. He had simply moved. In September 1974, Bundy enrolled at the University of Utah Law School in Salt Lake City. Almost immediately, young women began vanishing in the surrounding area. Nancy Wilcox, 16, disappeared on October 2nd. Melissa Smith, 17, the daughter of a local police chief, vanished on October 18th. Her body was found 9 days later in a canyon east of Salt Lake City, strangled and bludgeoned. Laura Amy, 17, disappeared on October 31st, Halloween night. Her body was discovered weeks later in a similar condition in American Fork Canyon. The violence was escalating. The kills were becoming more frequent, more bold, more savage. And yet, across state lines, no one was connecting the dots. Washington investigators didn't know about Utah's cases. Utah investigators knew nothing about Washington's. In an era before computerized databases and interstate law enforcement cooperation, each jurisdiction operated in isolation. Ted Bundy exploited this fragmentation with devastating efficiency. Then came the encounter that began to unravel everything. On November 8, 1974, 18-year-old Carol DeRanch was browsing in a bookstore at the Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah, when a man approached her. He identified himself as Officer Roseland and told her someone had been spotted trying to break into her car. Would she come with him to file a report? She agreed. He led her to his Volkswagen Beetle and attempted to handcuff her. But DeRanch fought back. She struggled, she screamed. She managed to get the car door open and tumble out onto the street. She escaped with a single handcuff dangling from her wrist. She was alive, and she had seen his face. That same evening, 17-year-old Deborah Kent disappeared from a school play at Vermont High School in Bountiful, Utah, just 20 miles away. A handcuff key was later found in the school parking lot. It matched the cuffs still locked on Carol DeRanch's wrist. The investigation shifted into a new gear. Detectives now had a surviving victim. They had a physical description. They had evidence. But Bundy was already moving again. In January 1975, Karen Campbell disappeared from a ski resort in Snowmass, Colorado. Her body was found a month later. In the spring, the remains of more victims were discovered, some reduced to skeletal fragments, scattered across remote mountain terrain. Bundy had been meticulous in concealing his crimes, often returning to dump sites to further interact with remains. The forensic details are too disturbing to recount in full, but they paint a picture of a man whose depravity knew no bounds. The break came on August 16, 1975, in the early morning hours. A Utah Highway Patrol sergeant named Bob Hayward was driving through a residential neighborhood in Granger when he noticed a Volkswagen Beetle that didn't belong. The car's lights were off, and it pulled away quickly when it spotted the patrol car. Hayward pursued. After a brief chase, the driver pulled over. Behind the wheel sat a composed, well-dressed young man who identified himself as Ted Bundy, a law student. Inside the car, Hayward found a ski mask, a second pair of handcuffs, a crowbar, an ice pick, trash bags, rope, and strips of torn sheeting. Bundy claimed the handcuffs were purchased at a flea market and the other items were normal possessions. But Hayward knew better. This was a kit. This was the equipment of a predator. Ted Bundy was arrested for possession of burglary tools, a charge that barely scratched the surface of his actual crimes. Carol DeRanch identified him in a lineup. Bundy was charged with aggravated kidnapping and eventually convicted in March 1976. He was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. It should have been the end. It wasn't even close. While Ted Bundy sat in a Utah prison, investigators from multiple states were finally beginning to share information. What emerged was staggering. The FBI, Colorado authorities, and Washington state detectives began constructing a timeline that placed Bundy near the location of nearly every disappearance across 3 states. The pattern was undeniable. The same car, the same modus operandi, the same victim profile. The web was tightening. Colorado authorities moved first. In October 1976, Bundy was charged with the murder of Karen Campbell. He was transferred to Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, to stand trial. And here, the case took a turn that would haunt American law enforcement for decades. On June 7, 1977, Ted Bundy escaped. He was representing himself in pretrial hearings, a privilege that granted him access to the courthouse law library without shackles. During a recess, he opened a second-story window and jumped. He landed hard, injuring his ankle, but he ran. He fled into the mountains above Aspen, surviving for 6 days on his own before being recaptured near a roadblock. He had stolen a car, gotten lost on mountain roads, and was finally caught driving erratically in the stolen vehicle. He was returned to custody. Security was tightened, but not enough. On December 30th, 1977, Bundy escaped again. This time, he had spent weeks sawing a hole in the ceiling of his cell using a hacksaw blade he'd acquired. He'd been dieting, losing enough weight to squeeze through a 1-foot square opening into the crawl space above. He crawled through the ceiling to the jailer's apartment, which happened to be empty that night, changed into civilian clothes, and walked out the front door. By the time his absence was discovered the following afternoon, over 15 hours later, Ted Bundy was already on a bus heading south. He made his way to Tallahassee, Florida. He assumed the alias Chris Hagen, and within weeks, he would commit the most horrifying acts of violence in a case already defined by horror. How does a man escape from custody twice? How does a known killer slip through the fingers of an entire state's law enforcement apparatus? These weren't failures of effort, they were failures of imagination. No one could quite believe that this articulate, legally savvy young man was truly capable of the savagery attributed to him. Even within the justice system, the mask held. But in Florida, the mask was about to be ripped away completely. January 15, 1978, a date that lives in infamy in the annals of American crime. In the early morning hours, Ted Bundy entered the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University in Tallahassee. He carried a large oak log. What followed was a rampage of concentrated violence that lasted barely 15 minutes and left a trail of devastation that would echo for generations. He entered the bedroom of Margaret Bowman, 21 years old. He bludgeoned her in her sleep, then strangled her with a nylon stocking so forcefully that it embedded in her neck. He entered the room of Lisa Levy, 20 years old. He beat her unconscious, strangled her, sexually assaulted her, and bit her, leaving deep teeth marks on her buttock and left breast. Both women were dead before anyone in the house knew something was wrong. In the next room, Kathy Kleiner was beaten so severely that her jaw was shattered. Her roommate, Karen Chandler, suffered a concussion, a broken jaw, and lost teeth. Both survived, but their lives were permanently altered. Bundy wasn't finished. After leaving Chi Omega, he broke into another apartment just blocks away and attacked Cheryl Thomas, a dance student, beating her so badly she suffered permanent hearing loss and never danced again. 5 women attacked, 2 murdered, 3 permanently injured, all within the span of a single night. The attack on Chi Omega was different from Bundy's earlier crimes. It was frenzied, reckless, almost uncontrolled, as if the man who had once planned every detail with cold precision had finally surrendered to pure, unchecked violence. Some investigators believe his 2 escapes and his time on the run had pushed him into a new and more dangerous phase. He was disintegrating. On February 9, 1978, Bundy committed what would be his final act of predation. He abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Diane Leach from Lake City Junior High School in Lake City, Florida. Her body was found 2 months later in a state park, partially decomposed and discarded beneath an abandoned hogshed. She was 12 years old, a child. Whatever thin pretense of a type or a pattern Bundy had maintained was gone. He had devolved into something purely predatory, taking anyone he could. On February 15, 1978, Pensacola police officer David Lee pulled over an orange Volkswagen Beetle with a stolen license plate. The driver gave a false name, then suddenly bolted from the car. Officer Lee tackled him after a brief struggle. The man on the ground fighting and kicking was Ted Bundy. He would never be free again. Ted Bundy stood trial twice in Florida. The first trial for the Chi Omega murders was held in Miami in June 1979 and was one of the first in American history to be nationally televised. Bundy predictably served as his own attorney. He preened. He cross-examined witnesses. He performed for the cameras. He seemed at times to be enjoying himself, as if the trial were not about the lives of 2 murdered young women, but about the spectacle of Ted Bundy. But the evidence was overwhelming. A forensic odontologist, Dr. Richard Souveron, matched the bite marks on Lisa Levy's body to Bundy's teeth with devastating precision. It was one of the earliest uses of forensic bite mark analysis in a major murder trial. An eyewitness, Nita Neary, identified Bundy as the man she saw fleeing the Chi Omega house with a club in his hand. Fiber evidence, circumstantial timelines, and the testimony of surviving victims completed the picture. On July 24, 1979, Ted Bundy was found guilty of the murders of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy and sentenced to death by electrocution. A second trial in Orlando in 1980 for the murder of Kimberly Leach resulted in another conviction and another death sentence. For nearly a decade, Bundy sat on death row at Florida State Prison, filing appeal after appeal. In his final days, desperate to delay execution, he began confessing, offering details of murders in Washington, Utah, Colorado, Oregon, and Idaho. He confirmed at least 30 victims. Investigators believe the true number could be significantly higher, potentially reaching into the hundreds. On January 24, 1989, at 7:16 a.m., Theodore Robert Bundy was executed in the electric chair. He was 42 years old. Outside the prison, crowds gathered, cheering and setting off fireworks. Vendors sold T-shirts that read "Burn, Bundy, Burn." The legacy of Ted Bundy is complex and deeply troubling, not just because of what he did, but because of what he exposed about us. He revealed how easily we are deceived by appearance, how our biases about what a criminal looks like can blind us to genuine danger, how institutional fragmentation between jurisdictions can allow a killer to operate for years without detection. He forced law enforcement to rethink everything, contributing directly to the creation of VICAP, the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, and to the development of modern criminal profiling. But perhaps the most unsettling legacy of Ted Bundy is the culture of fascination he inspired. Even today, decades after his execution, he is the subject of movies, documentaries, podcasts, and fan pages. There are people who romanticize him, who are drawn to the very charm he weaponized against his victims. And every time we center his name instead of the names of the women he destroyed, Linda Ann Healy, Donna Manson, Susan Rancourt, Georgian Hawkins, Janice Ott, Denise Naslund, Corinne Campbell, Margaret Bowman, Lisa Levy, Kimberly Leach, and so many others, we participate in the very erasure he sought. So here's the question I want to leave you with tonight. In a world that continues to be fascinated by predators like Bundy, are we honoring the victims, or are we giving the monster exactly what he always wanted? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, darkness doesn't always look like darkness. Sometimes it smiles.